Restoration and management of semi-natural areas, id est use of natural pastures and meadows. On the air photo to the left, you can see the small hill behind Mustiala old cow stable. Most of the hill is bare with no forest growing there. On the northern side of the hill, you can see some forest or young birches growing. So 100 years later, if you have a look at the same hill, this is an air photo from the up, you can see that only this part in the middle are still bare with now no vegetation. This is the rocky part of the small hill. Landscape changes very fast. Have a look at restoration and management of semi-natural areas. So semi-natural areas are areas used by humans, used in agricultural activities, mostly in moving hay and in grazing with different kinds of animals, so as a pasture. So when we are talking about restoration, then we should talk about different stages of restoration, because restoration of a semi-natural area is a process. It starts somewhere, but there may be no end, because the restoration is continuing and then moving from restoration into management. And above all, it's the use of the area. So we should start by finding out the traditional use of the area, which in most cases always have been either grazing, so moving fodder for animals, or then pasturing the areas. Before we start, we should carry out a preliminary inventory of the area. It can be an inventory of plants, it can be an inventory also of insects or other animals in the area, for example birds, but it can also be an inventory of, for example, how many rocky parts there are in the area or big stones, or it could be also mapping how many old trees there are in the areas, or for example how many dead tree material there is in the area. After that, then you should decide on the future use of the area and get a goal for your management. So the use is always in the focus. We are writing down a management plan for the area, and then we start the restoration of the area. And as said, it's not done by 1 year, so we do that annually, because we have to see how the area's reaction on the management things that we are doing in the area. And many times we have also to do some changes in the management from year to year. So it doesn't always go according to the plan. This restoration of a traditional rural landscape is a long process. We are not talking about 1 or 2 years. We should not rush. We are talking about 10 and 20 years. And actually, it is kind of wrong to use this word restoration. We should more talk about the use and utilization of these traditional landscapes, because all semi-natural areas, they are a result of an use and utilization in these rural agricultural activities. The main management methods we could divide into clearing, ring barking, cutting hay, grazing, chopping and pollarding, and burning out. Clearing. When should trees be cut down? Trees are cut when you need to use them. So if you need firewood, then you cut down the trees in the winter or in the spring part of the winter from January to March. And of course, you cut when you need the wood. If you want to build traditional fences and you want wooden material for these traditional fences, then that material is also collected in the spring side of the winter, meaning from January to March month. You can cut it as long as the tree and the soil is frozen and the tree is still have not waken up from the spring side. In that way, you get hardy wood. Afterwards, you have to dry it, of course. You get a dry, hard wood that will last longer. So leaves for sheep and cattle are taking off the midsummer because there is too much resin in the leaves in early summer and animals don't want to eat them. So after midsummer, in the end of June, you can start to collect leaves for animals. If you want to cut down trees and you want to remove at the same time nutrients from the soil, then you should cut down the trees with leaves. So when they have the maximum amount of leaves, so that could be, for example, in June or July. Then you get the most amount of nutrients out of the ground. You should not clear any area ready in 1 year. So transferring an area into a traditional landscape, into a semi-natural area, it's a process. And it's a process of use. It takes time. Let it take time. In the Finnish semi-natural areas, pine and spruce were usually removed because those make a lot of dark areas in these meadows or forested meadows, and in the shadow the grass is not growing. So the aim was to get some more light into the areas and to get more grass to be grown there so that there will be more food for cattle and sheep or horses who were grazing in the areas. Another thing is that the needles of pine and spruce, they also make the soil acid, and meadow plants don't want to grow under such conditions. So that's also one reason why we are taking away pine and spruce. Junipers can be cut down if they are in poor condition or if there are too many of them in the area. This kind of woody or columnar junipers are protected by law. So if a juniper is growing to look like one stem tree, then those we should not cut down. Another thing to pay notice to is that an old juniper, it looks perhaps that it's in poor condition because the bark on the stem starts to come off. But it doesn't mean necessarily that the tree is in poor condition. It's just a sign of that it's a very old tree. So save all leaf trees and also hard trees, for example, oak and birch are very hard wood. Goat willow and dead standing trees, decaying trees, berry-bearing trees and bushes should also be left. Of course, you should have some considerations if you have a large amount of them there. Consider when it's appropriate to remove red elderberry, birch cherry, willow, and mountain currant. For example, red elderberry is also a very hard tree, but it can really spread out and make the area difficult to penetrate in. If the area is grazed, you can also let the animals choose which trees or bushes to remove and which not, because they start to eat of them and they make some damage on them, and then some of them will naturally die out. Ring barking, aspen, alder and salix. I don't know if I'm using the right word when I'm saying ring barking. It means to take off the bark around the tree at 1 meter height. So when you are standing up and you are beside the tree, you could use a bill hook to take away the bark, and do not use a chainsaw. The bill hook is the best tool here, and you should be very pay notice to that you are taking away all the bark, so that not some parts of the inner barks will be left there, because then the tree would use those parts in order to transport water and nutrients to the upper parts of the tree. After that, you should leave the tree to dry for 3 to 4 years, and in that way also the root system will die out. So you should kind of follow the tree, monitoring it and see what's it happened. Did it die out or not? Sometimes the tree doesn't die out because it has a root connection with a mother tree, and it can get nutrients via other trees' root systems. So if you don't have many, aspen, alder or salix, you could try to see which of these trees are the biggest one. Those are most likely the oldest one. And by ring barking those, it may have an effect also on young shooting up bushes that are coming around. So only aspen, alder and salix are very effectively spreading themselves by these root shoots. So the root under the soil is distributing and giving up shots all over. And that's why we are doing this ring barking with them, in order to kill these trees, to get rid of them, and also of their root systems. So when it's dead and you have been waiting for 3 to 4 years and now it's dead and it's really dry, then you should cut it off on 1 meter height and still left it there to dry over the winter. The next spring, then it would be easy to take it off by bending it from one side to another side above the ground, and the roots in the soil will snap off, and it's easy to take it off and remove it from the soil. I will now show you some pictures of a restoration I have made of an old pasture area, and this is how it looked when we started the restoration of this area. Alder and aspen, and especially a lot of salix, willows in this area, and we started by ring barking the willows. And you can see here that it should be done on circa 40 to half a meter area of the tree. So don't make it very short, only like 20 centimeters is too little. Make it a little bit more. Be sure that you have taken also the inner part of the bark off. Let it dry for 3 to 4 years, and then we cut it off on this 1 meter height. And then you here can see this bending process where we are bending it forward and back in order to have the roots snapping off. And on this picture you can see now how we were able to remove nearly all of the bigger parts of the root system. This can only be done with willow and alder and aspen. So we did not really do this for birch, because birch is considered quite valuable firewood. So we more like them to store these birches and then cut them down when we need it for firewood. Here you can see now the area that has been restored. It is behind the fence. Here is a wooden fence here in the front, and in the back you can see there is a twig fence. So as we were clearing the area, we were taking all the branches, we cut them off so that they are going in one direction kind of, and we were then putting them on each other and building this kind of old type of twig fence in the back. You can see it. Then in the front here you can see to the right this stack here of these roots that we have been removing from this area, the soil, and then the upper parts that we are going to use for firewood. You can see here in the back. If you have in mind the picture of this overgrown area in the start, then this is exactly at the same spot the picture is made now, how it looks afterwards. And to our surprise, we did also find in this area an ancient construction. It looks like a stone boat. This area is in Estonia, where granite stones are very rare. And here has something been done. Maybe it has to be something with housing, something with construction of something, or maybe it have been a ritual landscape, or maybe it has been a grave. The archaeologists have been here to make sure that this is man-made. Yes, these stones are placed here by humans, but why they were made, there is no knowledge about that yet. So now no large archaeological excavations have been made in this area, but it was found then in this old pasture area. And then why did we start to do the restoration? Yes, we wanted to keep sheep, and my husband remembered this area as a child from the 1950s and 60s, that it was this kind of open pasture area, and we wanted to give it back this original use that this area had been used like a pasture. So we got a lot of more light. We did, however, save a couple of spruces, as you can see here on the photo, but we have a plan to take them down later. This photo was done 20 years ago, so nowadays all of these trees are much more bigger. When making restoration of some area, you should also consider, if you remove a lot of wood, what the consequences will be. For example, in this area there was a lot of salix, which of course is a sign of that the soil may be wet, or maybe it have been very wet. So when we removed the trees, then after that, in some years we had a lot of water in this area in the springtime. And of course, when having this overgrown with trees, the trees would drink this water, and it was before more dry. But again, when the years passed, there happened a kind of demineralization in this black soil, which this area have under it. And nowadays it is quite a dry area anyway. Here is an example from clear-cutting Vartijavuori hill, which is behind the Mustiala old cow stable. There is a rocky, hilly area which have been several times cleared for wood. And here we also made decisions on what kind of trees to preserve and what kind of trees to let be there. The juniper is here to the left. Of course, we were preserving, and the area have several very nice pine trees as well, which we also decided, some of them are very old, which we decided also to let be there. But then a lot of spruces were removed, and also a lot of younger trees, whereas then older trees, also trees that had some damage on it and which could be the habitat for many insects, we have been preserving. Often, traditionally, smaller twigs were burnt in the area in order to make it like nice and clean after you have been cutting down the wood. You should always consider burning if it's a good or a bad idea in the area. You get a lot of ash, and this ash gives also some nutrients, and of course you will get grass growing in these areas, and if you have animals that are starting to graze this area, then it's fine. If it's an area that you think that maybe here are some kind of ancient remains, some kind of archaeological findings you can do in the area, then you should not burn in the area. Then you should carry the branches and your wood material outside the area and burn them outside the area. It's always an option also to build a twig fence, as you saw on the previous pictures, so that could also be done. Some plants, they like burning, and in that way, in nature it happens also occasional that thunderstorms are going and starting fires. So the process of burning, it's a normal process of nature. So after the area has been cleared out, cut, then they will start to grow some different kinds of grasses, and then as a human you would like to cut the hay. This is in most of the Finnish semi-natural areas not possible because we have so much stones. But in many other countries, then cutting grass on semi-natural areas have been widely used. In Finland, it has also been used alongside roads and alongside rivers and lakes, and also temporary flooding areas where the grass used to be cut and used as fodder. This process stopped in 1970s in southern Finland and a little bit later than in different other parts of Finland. And this cutting of verges, roadsides and lakes and stream sides, it was done manually, so it was in most cases it was not possible to do it by using machinery. So this kind of semi-natural grasslands with a diverse vegetation, they have usually a lot of herbs, also medicinal herbs. This is a really healthy food for your domestic animals. They contain more different types of nutrients and minerals. So regular moving and removal of the moved hay is the most important management in cutting grasses and of semi-natural areas. A dry meadow does not benefit that much from moving. From the start on, there is usually less grasses. That could be, for example, hillsides, rocky areas with a very thin layer of soil. There is not really growing that much hay that it could benefit to cut that down. But in a lush meadow, so a fresh meadow with a lot of grass vegetation, temporarily flooded areas which dry out during the summer, lakesides and stream sides, there is a lot of grass that can be moved and used. When you cut the grass, it's best done with a blade so that the grass is cut, not crossed. But nowadays a lot of different types of grassland crossers are used, and that's not as optional as it should be with the old machinery, which have kind of scissors like are cutting the grass, or then of course using a scythe, which also is cutting off the grass. Then the benefit from hay cutting, it depends also on in what shape your meadow is. So if you have a meadow that has been removed grass for 20s of years or more, then there is already very little nutrients in the soil, and actually the grass is growing there also to very little, so it doesn't give that much hay anymore. So this is also kind of a process that the vegetation goes through. When you remove nutrients, it's become less and less nutrient rich, and more there will be growing plants that love sun. For example, different kinds of flowers that typically grows on meadows. The scythe. The scythe is a pretty old tool. Before, it used to have a very short wooden part to keep it in, and later on it was developing with having a much more bigger blade to cut with, and also to have a bigger kind of wooden stem to keep it in. So these with the short blade, they are suitable for pastures with a lot of stones, and also suitable to use for beginners. Whereas these which on the picture here to the right with a very long blade, they are suitable for moving grain and also hay fields when you move very flat meadows. Then if you use a wrought iron or a thinned blade, that's a matter of taste. There is a wide range of different kinds of scythes, different ergonomical handles to keep it in, and how to fasten it to the wooden stick, and how to thin it out, how to keep it sharp. So this scythe, it's a whole world of itself. There are good literatures available if you want to know more about this, and in, for example, Facebook, there are also groups of people who move hay by hand using a scythe, and so we have this kind of skilled group of people who are using this for a hobby, or more on a small scale for moving, for example, 1 hectare big areas. In all Nordic countries, there are also arranged scythe competitions annually every summer, where people are then showing off their skills. So let's move on to the hay to collect the fodder for the animals. Traditionally, it was used saws, axes, knives, scythes, rakes, and hay sticks. Later on, horses and wagons were used, and tractors, of course, after that. And there are different methods on how to dry hay. So in Finland, we don't have always very good weather, and it's nearly always very long periods we have to dry hay. So the hay work was really one of the works that took most of the power to collect this fodder for the animals, so that they could have the food during this long winter time that we have in Finland. The very old methods of cutting hay with the scythe, of course, and then it was let to dry on the ground, and after that it was simply rolled into a circle. If you have been using a scythe and cutting the grass and letting it dry on the soil, and if you then start from one end, you can actually make this kind of ball out of hay, which is then easy to transport into a shed where you are going to keep your fodder for your animals during the winter time. So there is no option up in Finland and Sweden and Norway to storage our high outdoors the whole year. We have to have buildings, and we have had buildings where we have been taking and putting all this fodder for animals under the roof. And you must be very skilled in calculating how much fodder will your animals eat. So do you have enough for your animals to keep them indoors then at least for 6-7 months? Yeah, even for more. So usually these summer months, then animals were put out to graze in May, usually not earlier, many parts of Finland first in the start of June. So actually they could be outdoors only June, July and August, because in September it already starts with very bad weather, and it can be cold, and there is always the predator risk also that is getting higher after the small cubs have been born in the start of spring and start of summer, and then they start to, for example, the wolves' mothers are teaching the cubs to hunt themselves, and it starts in the end of July. So August already, it's a higher risk to have cattle and sheep outdoors. So as there is a lot of food in Finland, as you can see, we have been developing many different types of ways to put the grass on the field up to dry. So we have this kind of different technical simple systems by using wooden sticks, and we were then hanging the grass on these simple buildings to have them to dry faster. And it's also important how you put it on these sticks in order to, if there will come a rain, so that the rain will smoothly run off the high, and the high can again quickly move after dry out after the rain. These different types of small buildings here, they have different Finnish names. There are not any names in English for these. You can see some these are usually not that high, but this Heinäsuova, down corner to the left, it is actually quite a big construction. So it's not a small construction of 1 or 2 meters. It could be 3 and 4 meters high or even higher. And usually 100 years ago, the animals were moving freely around and grazing. So when we have been making hay for them, then we were fencing our storage hay that is outside still to be dried. Then we fenced it in so that the animals could not go up to it and eat the grass from there. The sticks you can see here in the right corner, I just call them hay poles. These 2 first ones, you can see that they are just spruces where the branches have been taken off, but you have been leaving a short part of the branch left here. And in very old days, you were just using these, and you were putting the hay on these to dry when you have cut it. Later on, you can see, like in diversity, it gets less and less of these sticks in the middle. And the latest one here, it had only 1 or 2 holes in the pole where you were sticking a small wooden branch or part, or later on even it was used iron nails. So you got it to hang there, and then they were nicely drying up the high. So if we have a look on how then the fodder for the cattle has been collected and done in Finland, then in the start was of course the man and the horse and different kinds of nature materials. such as this wood, wooden sticks and smaller sticks and branches that will be used to hang up the grass to dry quickly in the fields, as our growing season is so short. And at the point when the grass is ready, we have very short time to dry it up and storage it, then take it inside to storage it for the winter. So these quick methods of doing this in a very short time, and everybody in the rural area was doing at the same time. And this was also the time when perhaps relatives or friends that were not engaged in agriculture came from cities even to help people in the countryside to get the hay collected as fodder for the winter and bring it indoors. After that, then, let's say that stopped in about 1970s in southern Finland. You can still some places see this traditional way of drying hay outdoors. Nowadays, it's mainly done by perhaps village associations or some kind of cultural traditional heritage associations who want to show off how it was done in old days. After that, then it was tractors and balers and natural string materials that were used. It was a lot of jute or hemp materials imported from Bangladesh or India. And they were used then to tie, you put them in the machinery in your baler, and it was tied together with those. In the beginning, these bales were pretty small. And as it was developing technologically, then they became bigger and bigger. Yes, at some time it was nearly so big that it was not possible for one person to just lift them up. Then they were lifted up with a tractor and put on a wagon and transported indoors. And so this actually continued, this period with having these square format bales, pretty long time. So still in 1990s it was used, but then soon came these bigger baling machines, which were making 400 or 600 kilos, big round bales. In the start they were tied up, covered by net. It could also be some machinery had with strings, string material, plastic materials then already, and also these nets were out of plastics. But in the beginning, the hay was still being dried on the field. So you are also turning the hay around after you have cut it. You have to turn it around and get it several times to get it to dry up. And then the newest one is that besides the baler, we have also now a packer machinery. And we are using a lot of plastics, so we are not drying the grass now totally dry. It maybe added also some liquids to this fermentation process to get it fermented. You can do it with pre-dried grass and then package into with plastic, and it must be airtight. So it's important that not any birds or other animals go and make holes in this plastic, because then this grass is not anaerobic anymore and it starts to rotten. Take a step backwards still, and I was talking about this twig fence. So when you are clearing up a forested area, then the first fence you may build is makes up these branches from these wooden trees that you have been cutting down. So the trunk was used for firewood or for building materials, but all the twigs, all the branches of the tree were cut off, and you could build a twig fence out of those. Here you can see that some of the trees have been cut pretty high up, and you are actually using them as a pole. So you are putting here is even a living tree, and so between the living tree and some trees you have cut down, you are building up your twig fence, so it is quite wide. These kinds of twig fences is which used to be a lot of in former days, and they are very good for example, for spiders. So different kinds of spiders that are building net and catching in their nets insects to eat. But these are also very good for all kind of other insects that like decaying materials. So in the bottom you have those who are decaying into soil. But higher up here you may have different kinds. You may even have perhaps some birds building their nests in such a place. And you can have other other insects that like to be on dead wood. So there are many different good things with having this twig fence. And if you are clearing out an area at the same time, then it's quite logical to build this twig fence if you're going, of course, to use it as a pasture afterwards. So another thing I wanted to remind you of, and it's an old habit that you could say that was in Häme region or custom. And I have from an old source from 1919, it was said that it was a bad custom to close the entire forest, and you divided the grassland, this forested grassland, into two parts. One you were pasturing, so grazing, and the other one it was kind of a meadow where you were just cutting the grass. And then every second year you were changing what you was moving last year, you pasture the next year, and the one you had a pasture last year, you are moving the second year. And first nowadays, then people have now we started using rotational pasturing. Rotational pasturing means that the cattle is moving every day. They get every day a new fresh area to eat grass on, which is much an imitation of the natural pasturing behaviors that for example, cattle and sheep have. So they are constantly on the move. They are not used to be enclosed in one small area. But even this old Häme bad custom, which is it said here, it's kind of very good because you are letting half of your pasture rest for the next year and graze it. And maybe they grazed several years moving, and then they were switching the areas. And maybe it was not only two, they could have also several of these, and using these different kinds of tactics in restoring also the grass area after pasturing. It's a good thing to keep into your mind at least. So pasturing, now we already thought a lot about pastures as we were talking also about cutting and moving hay and grasses. And let's then have some few thoughts about pasturing. So in old days, you had female and male animals, and you had animals in different ages, and usually they were kept summertime on the same areas, especially with sheep. There was always eaves with small lambs, and there was other sheep, and also the ram was usually walking with the flock on the pastures. So in cattle, usually calves have been keeping separately, but for example, milking cows and those who were not milking for the time being, they were usually kept at the same field, so there was not separate fields for those two different groups. Whereas today, usually we are now keeping separate those who are milking and those who are not milking. And then, of course, the calves also as a third group separate, and not to talk about the bulls. The bulls are not kept that much at all anymore on farms, but it's artificial insemination. So the structure of the herd, it has it has really changed a lot. Because if you have animals in different age in a flock, and even if you have different types of animals in the same herd, for example, cattle and horses and sheep, and let them graze at the same area, then there is always in each type of animal, they have an own leader. In sheep, it's usually the oldest Eve that is the leader of the animals on the pasture. She decides when to go to eat, where to go, and how long to graze. And she can also let other herd members exercise leadership in occasional days. So she can give the leadership role to some of the younger ones to train to be a leader of the herd. So when having animals of different age on the field, and especially when we live in an area where there is a lot of predators, so wild animals that could attack your domestic animals, then it's really good to have this age structure there in your flock, because then you get a normal reaction of the animals when there is a predator attack. For example, if you have now, let's say, lambs, and you have separated from the mothers at the age of 2 or 3 months, and you put them all on one field, all are the same age, all are the same clever or the same stupid. So if there comes a predator attack, then the predators, usually then the wolf, it managed to kill a lot of animals. Whereas if you had your flock herd so that there were some young ones with some small ones, and there were some old sheep also in the flock, and perhaps even someone who is sick. When there is a predator attack, the weaker ones are running in one direction and those who are stronger in another direction. And that's a signal for the predator who it should take. It goes on the weaker ones. It goes on the young eves with lambs, and on the weak and old animals. And especially it goes, of course, on the sick animals. And if you have an undulating terrain, let's say that your field has an upper part and a lower part, then there are research showing that the animals, the weaker ones, they run downwards, whereas the stronger ones run upwards. And that in itself is already a signal for the wolf that it are going downwards in the terrain after the weaker ones. So in a way, when we now see these a lot of killed animals, we can look at the herd. There was no age structure in the herd. All of them were of the same age, in the same shape and condition, which then confuses the members in the flock, and in this confusion the wolf may be able to kill then 20-30 animals in one flock. So animals on pasture, they eat in different places at different times of the day and during the grazing season, if the pasture is large enough and if it has enough different types of plants to choose among. So if you are sowing only 3 or 4 grass plants on your field or to eat, then of course they cannot choose that much. But if you have pasturing on a semi-natural meadow, there will be a lot of different kinds of plants. And that's really nice for the cattle and for the sheep or for the horses, because they can go and choose what they like just at that moment, or what their body is needing just at that moment of the year. So animals eat different plants at different times during the grazing season, if there are wild plants grown on the pastures. And I have been myself making research on sheep and what kind of plants sheep eat, and they tend, of course, to eat those who are very nitrogen-rich plants during the whole of the summer. So that's their favorite plants. But there are also different types of plants under different times of the grazing season that they choose to eat if they are available for them. Is a pasture planned and needed? Do you need to plan your pasturing? We had a few words about pasture, this rotation, that rotation pasture and having pasture to move all the time is very good and very nice. It's good for the grass. The grass managed to recover and give a higher yield, much higher yield if it's not grassed all the time. So the weather, of course, we are always dependent on the weather. So a plan would be nice, and in theory, it's nice that you have been thinking through how you should be doing, but pasture plans, they tend to change a lot during the summer, depending on how good the grass is growing in these areas where they are, grazing. So there may be also a change in animal amount, so how many animals you have in the area, and the group hierarchy may also play a role. Then about the fences and possible transportations, that's always also an issue on farms nowadays when we are not keeping animals free walking, free ranging as we used to do 100 years ago. So guarding was before 100 years ago in Finland, cattle and sheep and horses also were kept on forest grazing areas, and usually there was always a guard with them, and it was usually a child 7 years to 10 years or to 15 years old that was with the animals all the day in the forest. So this we don't have anymore now, and dogs have not traditionally been that much used as guarding animals in Finland, but they have been used, for example, a lot in Estonia, which is not far away. We have this predator danger in Finland all the time, has been here, and nowadays there are some new solutions for guarding. There are these virtual fences that are, for example, used a lot in Norway. In Norway, they don't have that much forest, so they have big sheep herds in Norway, and they are then grazing in the mountains, and they have these virtual fences which they think are functioning pretty well. So a plan is good, but in practice, then it may not really function well. Coppicing and pollarding. Coppicing is a method that in historical time has been used in cattle keeping. So it's the method in woodland management of cutting down a tree to a stump, which in many species encourages new shoots to grow from the stump or roots. Thus, you will have a quickly regrowing of the tree. As a result of this, also the trunk, the stem of the tree, will become bigger and bigger, and you can easily recognize in the nature if a tree has been coppicized or pollarded. So these both words, coppicing and pollarding, you find literature by using both of these words on this method, and it has been then traditionally used in many countries. Finland, which is very densely forested, we did not really have to do this because we had always a lot of bushes and trees that we could just cut down and use for fodder for animals. Whereas then in southern Sweden and in some parts of Finland, in southern Finland on Åland Island, for example, and in other countries where there was not so much wood left and they had these animals and they needed more fodder, then they were using a lot of coppicing. And also, for example, in United Kingdom and in England, for example, they have been doing this a lot. So these top branches and tops of the trees and branches of this tree was cut off, and you obtained these leaves and small-sized wood to use for yourself, and then the leaves and small branches were used for fodder for animals as well. They used to tie up them into bundles of leaves, and it was always from deciduous trees or bushes, so leaf trees, which were fed to sheep and cattle in the winter. We are mainly, when we talk about Finland, then we are mainly talking about willow, Latin name salix, then alder, and aspen, and also to some extent birch. So these four trees. If you go then more southwards, then there are, for example, ash and other deciduous trees that have been used. So this was used regularly still 100 years ago, for example, in Åland, in Häme, and in Vakka, Finland as well. But this is a tradition actually that I think many of at least the small farmers who keep sheep in small herds, they are still doing this for their sheep. So still today, people are collecting leaves for sheep. You tie them up into bundles, and it is also said that alder leaves help sheep to have less worms. So winter time, then some farmers also take down trees, also spruces, for example, not pine that much, but spruce, and mainly then alder trees, and they just give the trunks for the sheep in the cow stable to eat the bark of the trees. There is a lot of minerals in the bark of these trees and also in the leaves. And regularly giving them alder leaves, then you will have less problems, yes, with these inner worms that sheep can have. Some examples. For example, here you can see one tree, and you can see very typically, this is now from Estonia, this example, how the stem is going out like this and then up. And there are three other here also, and this is quite a typical sign of that the top have been cut off on this tree. Some examples from the Finnish archipelago in Turku region, and around there are several small islands where have been cut fodder for animals. This is from Aspö Island, also from Aspö Island. Here is from Hamna Houtskär. You can see this very old tree here that it's bending out, so it doesn't have really this top at all. Also from Hamna Houtskär, how a tree looks like when it has been pollarded. From Brunskär. So these trees may be very old, even if they don't have this very big trunk, they may be very old. So they are very slowly growing, also partly because of this pollarding. And maybe the soil is not so rich and deep. It maybe here is more sandy soils. And that's why you get very dense and hard wood out of these trees, which are very slowly growing. Revskär. And this is from Kittamaa Uusikaupunki. Again, you can see that something have happened here with the top. It may be, of course, that it was a natural accident or something happened for a tree. But when you find them in connection with pastures, then usually there have been cut, when they were younger, these trees, it have been cut some branches of leaves from them. Vehma, Nord pasture area again. And here is a photo or a painting and the painting is done by a very famous Jenny Nyström. She was a writer and illustrator, mainly illustrator, and in the background here you can see a tree that has been pollarded. So a very thick trunk here, and here comes out then some new branches from the tree. Let's have a look on an old page from an old book about how the fodder for the animals was collected and served for animals. So leaves had a big importance in feeding animals, especially as fodder for sheep in Finland. And cutting the leaves was carried out at the end of June and in July when the leaves were fully grown. It was a fun job to do, and the men were sawing down larger trees, birch, aspen and alder, and women and children cut the branches with billhooks and knives. In Kuusamo region, which is quite high up in Finland, then when you had taken down the tree, it was called rangi, but then when you had taken off all the branches, it was called ranga. So these branches with leaves on were tied together into bundles, and the Finnish word for this is kerppu. And then the rest of the wood was made for firewood for the winter. And the sheep got these bundles with the leaves on, but for cattle, people were reaping off the leaves when they were dry, and they put these leaves into warm water, and it was given as warm food for cattle during the winter. So when you had tied them up together, you put them to dry in different formations. It was pretty much the same formations as used also for hay. No, some of them at least were used also for these bundles. You could put them up in 2 rows and both up and down, and you could also make these very big sawa out of these leaf bundles to dry out. If it was a smaller amount, you were usually hanging them indoors in your sheds or the same place maybe where you also storage your hay. You had also tied up them in the roof to hang down these bundles of dried leaves. And if you made this very large stack of it, then it was much more higher than one man is long. So billhooks, they were one of the most important tools in former days, and here you can see 2 different old ones. The one here in the right corner, it's made by a blacksmith, and the one up here, it's already industrially produced, more than 100 years ago though, but old, but industrially made. And then nowadays, if you go to a shop with tools, you can find these Fiskars billhook, which also is very, very good. I really like this tool, and I have been working a lot with this tool. Here is an old photo of how they are building this kerppusuola. As I told you that they put up these bundles of leaves that they have to dry in these very big constructions. This is then before 1990s, this picture. You can see here that it is tree trunks, that the branches have been cut off. This is a spruce, most likely. And they are then and we cannot really see on this picture now, but I think there are some going in this direction as well also. And then they are hanging this wood, these leaves up here to dry. So pretty high up you can see a very big heap of leaves. And these were then, when they were dried up, they were transported to the farms. Some of them maybe ripped off the leaves, and they storaged only the leaves for the cattle, which they made then for warm food, But for the sheep, they were giving the whole bundle, also with these wooden parts, because the sheep is also eating these small wooden parts that the leaves are hanging on. Nowadays, then in the north, both in northern or in Sweden and in Finland, also in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, then if animals, cattle, sheep, horses have possibility to go into the forest, they very likely they eat leaves of different trees. But actively collected fodder for winter, not that much anymore. So it's mainly during the summertime. So when I was keeping sheep, I was keeping for 8 years sheep. Then every day I was cutting down some willow leaves for the evening for my sheep. And because due to the predator risk, I had to take my sheep indoors during the night. And when I had this routine that every evening I was cutting down these leaves, and the animals knew that they will get it when they go indoors, then they always followed me indoors, and I could then easily close up behind them. On this picture, you can see them eating apple. So also apple leaves are yummy for sheep. They eat also spruce, and they do also eat pine shots, especially in the spring times. So on spruce, it's these newly grown green outer parts that they are eating. And here again an example where I'm giving different types of salix, and I think here is some alder also perhaps for my sheep for the evening. I just hang them here on the fence like this, and then they were eating it there. And here you can see aspen, birch, and salix for animals to eat that have been dried up leaves, or they are just there to be dried for the moment. After you have been coppicing a young salix, then it starts to regrow very fast and really a lot. And you can see here that cutting down this tree made it regrowing both down here from the soil, new regrowths, but also on the stem nearly the whole way up. So actually during one summer you could harvest this from salix. You can harvest several times green fodder for the animals. So why did then people stop giving this very nice forest leaf fodder for their animals? And the reason behind this is the forest industry. The forest industry didn't like that cattle or horses or sheep were grazing forest, because they made a lot of damage, according to them, on trees. And tree was 100 years ago, a little bit more, 150 years ago, it was very valuable for the emerging paper industry, and the forest industry. Paper and forest industry have been very important in Finnish history economically. So there came a ban on slash and burn technique. So you should stop burning down forest in order to grow in the ashes. And after that, then there was also a lot of writings on that you shouldn't let your animals graze in forests anymore. And of course, both goats and sheep, they eat a lot of bark as well. And now let's have a look on some pictures. How does it look then on the trees, the damages that the animals make on wooden trunks? This is just an willow, type of willow that is kind of a tree, very old growth. And I had it lying down on the soil, but even that the sheep were eating the bark off. But damage on living trees, here you can see the bark eaten from an alder. So usually they don't eat all of the bark. They eat some of the bark. So they don't actually kill the tree, but of course, if a tree has such a damage, there will come some fungi diseases, and you will get some kind of different kinds of biodiversity, of course, also through this. But the quality of the wood, of course, it's damaged. So as before. Here you can see the damage on a living tree root spruce. And I remember this very well because it was one of my young rams it was like one individual, one sheep. He was successful. He was going and eating all the bark of spruces in the pasture that summer. So most likely he had some deficit in minerals and he was just fixing it, or maybe it just liked the taste of it. Afterwards, then the spruce start to produce resin, and you can see here it is covering its wounds. One newly eaten, and here you can see how this wood is producing this resin to protect itself then from different kinds of fungi and other diseases that will come into this wound. Burning out. Sometimes you would like to burn an area. If it's open, it's an old grassland that has not been grazed for the past years, and it has not been cut, the grass there either. You want to get rid of this old overgrown grass from the former year in order to get their new fresh grass and start to graze it with animals. Then it's a good idea to burn this area out. The same rules apply to burning out an area as to slash and burn cultivation. It's also called Sweden cultivation in literature. So about the fire, you have to report to the local regional emergency center in advance that you're going to do this. And maybe it's a good idea also to inform, to perhaps even have some water ready. So if something happens, that you could also put out the fire with water. It's burned in the spring when the snow has melted and the air is calm, so there should not be any strong wind. First, you can burn the edges of the area in a controlled manner. So you burn around all the edges, you burn off. So, and then you burn the middle area of the area you want to burn. You can protect landscape trees. So if you have solitary trees, you maybe have some old nice junipers or some old nice birch or pine in it that you don't want that they would burn. Then you remove the grass and this burning material close up to these trees. You can also pour water around these trees so that the soil is wet around these trees. And as I said, water must be available, and you should also have ready fresh spruce branches. We call it hosa in Finnish. We are using those to kill. So we hit the fire to kill it if needed. So if we can see that the fire is escaping from our borderline that we have already burned the first time, like the first thing that we do is burning this borderline. But if it jumps over, sometimes the fire jumps over these borderlines, then you can hit it with a fresh spruce branch and it will kill it, the fire. So some plants and insects benefit from burning out. So the burning out promotes the following plants. There is one plant called Beranium bohenicum. I didn't find an English word for it, but this is definitely benefited by forest fires, as go for heat speed well and Burnet saxifrage. Other plants promoted by burning are eastern pasquiflower. It grows on very dry, sandy areas. And it grows in Finland, also in Häme region, but it's quite rare. And then we have umbellate wintergreen that also is promoted by burning. Then we have Adder's tongue. I discovered that this plant really liked burning because when I was clear cutting in my forest and I were burning also some twigs and materials, and the next year, no, I was burning in the springtime, and it was the same year it started to grow a lot of this adder's tongue on the edge. So it was where the fire stopped and where the green grass comes towards this fire. In that edge area, there was growing a lot of adder's tongue. Then common bent and also common cowweed are promoted, their growth is promoted by burning. Also wild strawberries. Wild strawberries like new open areas with a lot of light. So if you have had some area, even some clear cuttings in forest, then usually one of these first plants that come into clear cuttings are wild strawberries. After that, it will also come other berry plants. In pasturing, you need these fences, and to defend the traditional type of fences that we used to use, then they were also benefiting birds. We built this traditional fence in Mustiala years ago, and the first summer already we had birds that have building their own nests on these wooden fences. By leaving old decaying, so dead wood in the forest, it may be standing in the beginning, afterwards it may be falling down, then this is a home for a lot of insects. And when you have here a lot of insects, then you will also get birds. For example, woodpeckers have been doing these holes in this tree, so they are looking for insects that are in the tree to eat. This is the Siberian flying squirrel. You find it in Finland, in Estonia, and in Russia. It's a night animal. It's very rare to see it daytime. But at this time, in the beginning of the summer, when the mother have small squirrels, small kids, she can be moving around also daytime. And this picture of the manure of this flying squirrel, you can see under aspen trees. Usually it is eating aspen leaves only, which give is this yellow color. And it's easy to spot it in winter time because it will fall on the snow, and you can see then its nest where it is being living. Summertime it is moving around a lot, so even during one day it may be shifting the place where it is sleeping in. Not if it of course have the small ones, but adult ones are moving around to avoid predators to eat them. It is not actually flying, but it is when it reaches out its legs and arms, it has like a bat, some skin between them, and it can then glide from one tree to another one. And this animal, there is a lot of disputes about because it's under nature protection, this animal. And always, if somebody doesn't want that somebody is taking down the forest, then if you have spotted this animal, then it stops the processes of taking down the forest. And as it is quite difficult to spot it, and we know that the habitat for them have become less and less, but it's difficult to say then actually how many we have of them because they are so rare to be seen. If you're in Mustiala, then it's a good idea to walk behind the old cow stable I was talking about, Vartiovuori Hill, and there is a road named Kyttelän tie which goes to road number 10. And if you walk alongside this road, at the end on the left side, you will have such open wooded pasture, old pasture. And in this area, we have been seeing this Siberian flying squirrel. And they have been also in other areas in Mustiala, they have been also, if you walk from the new cow stable towards the dryer, or the road which leads out to road number 10, it's the same road as I think the milk car is driving. So in those small forests, both to the left and to the right, there are some pastures to the left. In these areas here have also been seen this Siberian flying squirrel. So let's have a look on ants. At Kiltsi Meadow, I once calculated that on a little bit more than half a hectare, there was 90 ant nests in the soil. So this is some different types of ants. They are not the same ants that are building these small needle stacks in the forests, but on the meadows where you have permanent grass growing, then there are ants that make the nests in the soil. Butterfly common blue. The food of this species larvae are leguminous plants, pea plants, such as common bird's foot trefoil, red clover, meadow wedgeling, and cow wedge. And this butterfly lives in cooperation with ants. This love of ants is called myrmecophily. Many of these blue-wing butterflies, so those who are blue, they live in a cooperation relationship with ants. Depending on the species, this relationship can be based on the cooperation of the butterfly larva and the ants, but the larva can also live in the nests as a parasite, or even use the ants for food. In all cases, however, the caterpillar makes the ants tolerate its presence and even take care of the caterpillar and the subsequent cocoon. Sometimes the larva has very quickly in the springtime to get out of the ant nests, otherwise the ants may start to eat it. One more photo of some ant nests. In southern countries, for example, in Brazil, you have these termites, big ants. We don't have these very big ants and here, but this is a semi-natural grassland that was burnt. And you can see it's a little bit black here in the front of the picture as well. And after it was burnt, then it started to grow grass again. And then you could very nicely see all these ant nests that there was in this old permanent grassland.